Hello everyone, and welcome to this FM in Focus webinar. My name is Hazel and I'm part of the team that provides student support here at ACCA. Our session today is designed to support you in your preparation for the financial management exam. I'm very pleased to be joined by expert tutor Jo Tuffill. Before I hand over to Jo, I'd just like to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your screen, there are a number of buttons you can use. There's a help icon on the left which provides resources and information to help you resolve any technical issues you might experience. There's icons for slides and media player. You'll need to see both of these during the webinar, so make sure you've selected them. The attendee chat function will enable you to engage with fellow webinar attendees, which is the icon on the right-hand side. And lastly, a list of available resources, and the icon looks like a file symbol. You can click on this and access resources relevant to today's webinar, including the direct links. You can rearrange your screen to suit you and resize the windows if you need to. And at any point, if you can't hear what we're saying or you can't see any of the visuals, please refresh your browser. Registering for this webinar means you'll be sent an email tomorrow with the details on how you can listen to it again. So don't worry if you miss something or if you have technical issues, you'll be able to access the recording. I'm going to hand over to Jo in a moment. And if you'd like to ask ACCA or Jo a question, then please click on the Q&A button, which is the middle icon at the bottom of your screen. Please note we can't guarantee responding to everyone directly, either verbally or in the web chat, but we really hope that the questions we share will be helpful to everyone. So welcome once again, and now over to you, Jo.
Hi everybody, I'm Jo Tuffill. I'm a management accounting expert tutor and I've taught on ACCA courses for over 20 years now. I'm really passionate about supporting students and helping you get that pass in FM. So please listen carefully to all I have to say today because it is important and you will pick up tips and tricks which will get you through this exam. So the agenda today is we're going to go through what the Study Hub can do for you, my quick exam tips, going to be utilising those mocks on the practice platform. Then I've got some most asked questions from previous webinars which I'll go through, and then you get to get your chance, your live Q&A. So first of all, the Study Hub. I have a poll for you. Have you used the ACCA new Study Hub? Yes, no, or what is it? Please answer for me. Give you all a minute or so to answer. Getting there. I'll wait until we've got about 75% of you answered. Getting lots of thumbs up emojis. You all seem to like the emojis at the moment. Right, I'm going to end it there. So brilliant to see that 68%, nearly 70% have used the Study Hub. That's great. It's a really good resource. Some of you still don't know what it is, so let's go through it. So you can access it through your My ACCA. And what it is, it's 3 stages. There's teach, test, and practice. So the teach area is basically a textbook with examples and activities to do. And it goes through the whole syllabus from start to finish, teaching you it online, but also testing you by looking at some examples and getting you to complete them. Then you go into the test area, which is basically quizzes after each of those chapters. And there's quizzes to go through, and you can basically go through practicing what you've learned by using exam standard questions. They're MCQs, or multitask questions. You can see that you can look at the time that it's taking you to do them, the number of correct answers, and you can then review anything that you got wrong. There's also these flashcards, which is basically using definitions to help you learn the theory. So what is fiscal policy? You flip over the flashcard and it tells you what it is. You say it in your head, obviously, first of all, and then you say whether you got it right or wrong, so you can track your progress. So that's the test. Finally, there's the practice. These are based on past exam questions. There's the MCQ areas, which are obviously still quizzes. There's case MCQs, which you'll be looking at a case MCQ for section B, and then be 5 questions. And then there's the section C questions, which you can plan your answer in a way, in a sort of a word processing area. So you can see when you review your answer against the answer in the platform, then you can mark it yourself. So it's all a really good resource, and it's a free resource, and you should use it because it is based on past exam questions and it covers the whole syllabus. So using the Study Hub is in conjunction with your current provider or your own textbook that you're using is a good way to get that added value into your practice. Now I'm going to go on to my quick exam tips. So first of all, I've just seen a quick Q&A question actually on this, and this is what I wanted to make sure everybody understands. There's 7 parts of this syllabus, okay? And not all of the syllabus is tested in all of the exam, all right? So let's have a look at what is tested in certain areas or tends to be tested more. So in section C, these 3 areas will form the main part of your questions. You'll get 2 questions from either the working capital area, the investment appraisal area, or the business finance area. They will form the main part of the question. You can add in a written element from these 2 areas, very small element normally, not part of the main question. So just to focus, C, D and E will be the main question. You will not get F and G, business and asset valuations and risk management, in section C. And as you don't get those in section C, lo and behold, they are likely to be, or more than 100% likely to be, 2 of your questions in the section B area. I am pretty certain that you will be getting a business or asset valuation question and a risk management question in your section B. The third question will come from the other areas of the syllabus. So do not avoid those 2 areas because they're not tested in section C. They will come up in section B and they will be 20 marks. So do not avoid them at your peril. And you will, it's one of those things that most students think, well, I don't really like asset and business valuations and risk management. They're not coming up in section C, so I'm going to avoid them. You can't avoid them. They will be coming up in section B and they will be 20 marks. So hopefully you've been warned. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is a game plan. When you're doing this exam, you need to have a game plan. The best game plan I've found is A, then C, then B. Allocate your time to them. 50 minutes for section A, 80 minutes for section C, and 50 minutes for section B. Time management is important. The easier marks come in the first 60% of the time. You get those easier marks, and then the 40% of the time that's left will be managing the harder marks. So do not go over time because all you're doing is getting those harder marks. Move on to the next section where you scoop up the next set of easier marks within the time. We need 50%. So it's really important to focus on these easier marks. How do you focus on the easier marks? Well, you use the flagging technique in section A and B. You basically flag any MCQs which you just don't get straight away. Move on to the next one, which you may get an easier task with, and therefore you're moving through your section A and B efficiently and effectively. And then at the end, when you get to the end, you go back and do those harder questions. Again, remembering that they are the harder questions and you don't need those to pass the exam. So in terms of section C though, obviously there's written and calculation elements. Do not spend all your time on those calculation elements to the detriment of the written elements. It might also be better to do the written elements if you can, if they're not related to the calculation elements. They may be completely independent of them first, so that you can save time and then move into the calculation elements after that. Distractors are there for a reason. You need to understand why they're there. You need to build a review of them into your question practice, and evidence suggests that students do rush through these MCQs. You can see this from your performance, my performance that you get from the ACCA after the exams. People are rushing through these MCQs at the detriment of passing. So you mustn't rush through them. You must take your time, otherwise you'll fall for a distractor. Make sure you reread the question before you select the answers. So here's an example. The first one says, what is the theoretical value of a right per existing share to 2 decimal places? Read it carefully. It says per existing share. If you hadn't have read that and rushed it through, you may have thought it was asking about the theoretical value of a right. But that's incorrect. We want it per existing share. We also want it to 2 decimal places. So you must round up or down correctly. Reread the question and you may catch that error. Again, the next one says, which 2 of the following are descriptions of basis risk? If you don't tick 2, you get it wrong. If you get 1 and that's correct, it's still wrong. You have to tick 2 correct answers. There's no 1 marks. It's 2 or nothing. So even if you get one of them right and 1 wrong, it's still 0. Really, really concentrate on what you're doing. Here's another classic example. You've got 4 answers there, 4 responses. 3 of those will be distractors. If you get this question wrong slightly, i.e. you make a small error, that distractor will be there and you think you've got it right. So you need to understand why they're there. So let's have a look at this question. It says, in relation to finished goods inventory and assuming a 360-day year, how much finance will be needed from the overdraft? Well, what this is talking about is permanent and fluctuating current assets. And we should match finance. So we should be matching fluctuating current assets with short-term finance, i.e. an overdraft, and permanent current assets with long-term finance, i.e. equity. So we need to find out how much our finished goods inventory is for fluctuating purposes so that we can match it to the overdraft. So if you look at the top, the inventory days is inventory over cost of sales times 360. That's the 120 and the 90. We have a minimum and a maximum. The minimum will be our permanent current assets. We don't go below those 90 days. The maximum will be the permanent plus the fluctuating. So therefore the difference is our fluctuating current assets. So as inventory dollars is therefore cost of sales times inventory days over 360, we can calculate that value. And here are all the possible answers. The right answer is 30 days converted into 10 million. So that's 30 over 360 times by 120 is 10. That's our correct answer. But as you can see, all those other answers are there if you make a mistake. If you'd used the maximum as the fluctuating, you'd have got the 40. If you'd have used the minimum, which is the permanent, not the fluctuating, you'd have got the 30. And if you'd have used sales and not cost of sales, you'd have got the 17. They're all there to distract you. So it's important to understand why they're there, and hopefully you can build that into your practice. Here's another example. It says, in relation to interest rate derivatives, which of the following statements is correct? Well, the actual statement that's correct is A. Interest rate future futures hedges can be closed at any time. That is a correct statement. There's a they close out on quarter dates, but you can close them out at any time before the end of that quarter. Those three are distractors. They've got something in each of those sentences which distracts you, and you may think it's a correct answer. So first of all, forward rate agreements fix the interest rate. Absolutely correct. And if you hadn't read on, you would potentially click that as the right answer. But the distractor is long-term borrowing. It's short-term borrowing, not long-term borrowing. So therefore, that's an incorrect statement. C, if interest rate options are allowed to lapse, there's no overall cost to the holder. That's again another incorrect statement. You are allowed to let them lapse and therefore take the favourable rate, but there is no overall cost to the holder is an incorrect statement because there is a premium to be paid. So that is a distractor. The final one, buying both an interest rate cap and an interest rate floor as an example of a collar. Brilliant. Interest rate cap and interest rate floor, we understand. The point is that you get one and the other, and there is a collar. That is a correct statement. But unfortunately, there's a distractor in there. They say buying both. And unfortunately, you don't buy both. You have to buy one and sell another to create a collar. So as you can see, you can fall for all three of those, and they're all distractors. So understand the language and why they're not correct answers. Okay. My other one is learn the theory and techniques, not the answers. We go through that revision kit and we often start learning those answers, but you won't get the same question in your exam. You may get a similar question, and if you're lucky enough, you may get an exactly similar question, but often they're different. They're worded slightly differently. So you need to learn your theory and your techniques to be able to apply to the questions. So it's application this exam, not necessarily rote learning. So you need to learn the formulas and the process for WAC, but to be able to use those formats to create a WAC based on the scenario you're given. You need to be able to explain concepts, not just calculate. For instance, CAPM. You need to explain why CAPM uses systematic risk and not unsystematic risk. Then also be able to use CAPM to calculate that cost of equity. It's not just about calculations. Learning the pros and cons of something, like the IRR. You may just be asked for the cons, or you may just be asked for the pros, or you may be asked for the cons and pros in relation to the net present value. It's important to learn them within context, but then apply to the question. Definitions are important, but you need to apply them to the questions. So with Islamic finance, you need to learn the conventional finance, which works with the Islamic finance, so that when they ask you, what could you do in as Islamic finance in relation to bonds, then you would say Suki bonds, which are Islamic finance. Otherwise, if you don't know that they're in relation to the bonds, you will pick the wrong one. Really important to not avoid the subjects you hate. They will come up. So this is an example of using theory that can be applied to different types of questions. So here we have similar, not the same. So these three questions are based on the same theory, but they're asking you to answer in a different way using that theory. So first of all, the first one says, discuss the circumstances under which current WACC of a company can be used in investment appraisal and indicate how this limitation can be overcome. Well, the three circumstances when you can use the current WACC is when it's the same business risk, the same financial risk, and the project is small in relation to the rest of the company. The limitations, how it can be overcome, is by creating a risk-adjusted discount rate. That's the answer to number one. Number two says discuss how the capital asset pricing model can be used to calculate a project-specific cost of equity. It's using the same theory. The capital asset pricing model uses the beta factors based on using the same business risk as the project you've got, and you re-gear it to your current financial risk and then use that in capital asset pricing model. It's using the same theory, but you have to answer it in a different way. You're still using the term business risk, financial risk, but you're not answering the question in the same way. You have to explain why you need to do that. Number 3 says discuss how a risk-adjusted discount rate can improve investment decisions. Absolutely, you're going to explain that if you've got a project with a different business risk, a different financial risk, and is large compared to the company, you need to use a risk-adjusted discount rate. But you then need to go on and answer, how does it improve investment decisions? Well, if you're using the wrong rate to calculate the net present value, you could accept a project which is no longer viable for your shareholders because the risk has gone up in that project. And you could be using WACC, which is just too low a rate. So it's important to use that theory. Hopefully, I've explained it in the context of the question asked, not the question learnt. Okay? Not the answer that's been learnt. Hopefully, that's clear. So written questions, do not use bullet points. I'm going to repeat that. Do not use bullet points. Use full sentences. A bullet point is IRR is a percentage measure. That's a bullet point. A full sentence is one advantage of the IRR is that it's a percentage measure, and non-financial managers can understand percentage measures because they've seen interest rates and inflation rates before. That is a full sentence. It's not a bullet point. You will not get any marks for bullet points. Look at the verb being used in the requirement. If it says identify, describe, comment, then a short sentence will suffice. If it says explain, discuss, or critically discuss, then more detail will be required. You need to state the point, explain the point, and illustrate the point using the scenario if asked. So 1 mark is coming for stating and explaining the point in a full sentence. But if you've asked to use the scenario, then explaining the point needs to be related to the scenario, and potentially it becomes a 2 marker. So I've got a poll for you here. Which question does not need to be applied to the scenario? A, discuss which machine should be selected by Clover. Discuss 3 advantages of using net present value rather than the IRR in investment appraisal. Critically discuss with reference to relevant theory the view of the director A and B on raising new finance. So which of those does not need to be applied to the scenario? Please select your answers. I'll give you a minute or so to carry on. Okay, give you sufficient time, I think. Brilliant. 85% of you said number 2, and that is correct. Well done, everybody. It doesn't have the name of the company in the question, or it doesn't make a specific reference to part of the question, i.e. the view of the director, which is the 3rd one. So B is a general thing, and you just need to use your own examples to explain 3 points of advantages of using NPV rather than the IRR. So that does not need to be referenced to the scenario at all. So there's an example of part of a question where you don't have to do the calculations to enable you to do that part of the question. So it might be an idea to do that first, get it out the way, and save time to be able to do the calculations. So let's focus on that 3rd question. It says critically discuss with reference to relevant theory the view of director A and B on raising new finance. This is the scenario, and director A is talking about the view of Modigliani and Miller with tax. It's all about capital structure theories. They are saying that they've heard at high levels of gearing, the company can make cost savings, which will improve the weighted average cost of capital. That means if you increase the debt in your structure, then you will drive down the weighted average cost of capital. That's M&M with tax. The second theory is the traditional theory, where they're saying that effectively there's an optimum level of gearing. And if you go past that optimum level, then the WACC will go up again. So you've got to identify their views to be able to answer this question. And so you need to then plan your answer because there's 6 marks going. So you need 6 points, split 3 and 3 between the two views. Critical discussion means limitations are required to get the full marks. And you must use the scenario because you've been specifically requested to. So correctly linked to the relevant theory will get you 1 mark. M&M with tax. M&M without. M&M with tax, sorry, and the traditional theory. You need 1 pro, explain why the theory is relevant to the view, and then you'd need 1 con, which is explain why the theory is not relevant. The first 2 marks are easier to get and the third one is harder. We don't necessarily need that 3rd mark. We need 4 out of the 6 to pass the exam. So the point is, make sure you get the easy marks, linking to the theory and explain why the theory is relevant. Brilliant if you can explain why the theory is not relevant, but they are the harder marks to get. Full sentences, 1 mark. Hopefully that's clear. So finally we come to the practice platform section C. I have a video for you to explain all these points which I've got here. You need to label your workings and use headings. There's no need to write out the formulas. The markers can see the formulas in the cell. It's a waste of your time. You must expand columns and format your numbers because it makes it easier for the marker. We don't want to see any hashtags. You need to save time by using copy and paste, and I show this in the video. You must highlight your answers so it's clear what is your answer. And you must practice using functions like the IRR and the net present value function in section C. These save time. So let's have a look at this video and you'll understand what I am on about, hopefully. It's in the media player.
So here I am on the practice platform and I'm looking at the September-December 2021 past exam paper. This is one of the section C questions. And this question is on the working capital area of the syllabus. So this question, Candy Company, has 5 requirements in 3 parts. And the first 3 requirements are using this spreadsheet. So it says, calculate the financial effect on the bulk purchase discount, the financial effect on offering the early settlement discount, and then comment on the financial acceptability. Now this is all to be done in this one spreadsheet. So I have completed part 1 for you, the bulk purchase discount. And I'm showing you here some top tips for how to complete this effectively and quickly. Now the bulk purchase discount asks us to compare the current policy with the future policy. It will involve the same calculations therefore. So you need to lay it out so that you can quickly copy the same calculations that you're doing for the current policy into the new policy, but just change the variables. There is no need to write out the formulas that you're calculating for the purchase cost, the order costs, and the holding costs. I can see those by interrogating the cells. So it would completely waste time if you were to type out order costs, for instance, the cost per order times by the demand divided by the order quantity. I can see that by clicking on that cell as a marker, which I'll do now. I've not wasted time writing that out because it's in the cell. I've done the same for the holding cost. So the holding cost here is 9% of the purchase price times by
the average inventory. I have not written that out. That will take time. You need to be able to show this effectively and quickly by using labeling and then using the formula functionality within the cells. What I was then able to do is then copy this across by using copy and paste. And then all I had to then do is change those parameters. So for the new policy, I obviously need to type in new, and then I needed to change the purchase price because the purchase price is going to be cheaper because we're going to be getting a discount. So the discount is 1.5%. So I'm just going to go equals 30 times by 0.985. Therefore, it's now 98.5% of the cost. As you can see, that automatically then changed the holding cost, and it automatically then changed the purchase cost. Again, I need to change that to say new, so I'm just going to reference it. I then need to change the quantity to be the 1500, and again, it will automatically change everything that's affected in there, which it has done. I then need to just check any other parameters are changing. And if you check the question, the order cost is going to go up by 25. So that needs to go up to 100. And the holding cost is now going to be 10% of the purchase price. So I need to change that to be 0.1. And there you have it. That was so much quicker than retyping the formulas. Also, I'd like you to highlight key figures so the marker is clear on the calculations you've made. And again, clearly labelled the total cost of the current policy, the total cost of the new policy. And then reread the question to check you've answered it correctly. It says calculate the financial effect of accepting the bulk purchase discount. So therefore the financial effect needs to be pulled out and that needs to be highlighted too. And it's a saving because the current cost is higher than the new cost. So hopefully you can see by clearly labelling the cells, you do not need to write out formulas, but you do need to make sure that you're using the spreadsheet effectively and making sure that you're referencing cells so that the marker can see where your figures have come from. This is so important because of those own figure rule marks. Any mistakes can then be followed through by using the formulas in the cells. And therefore you only get penalised at the first mistake. Remember, practice makes perfect, so you must practice using this spreadsheet.
Okay, welcome back. Hopefully that was informative and gives you a clear understanding of how the examining team are going to be able to mark your exam, and the clear understanding, hopefully, that you need to use clear workings that can be followed through. So now we come to utilising mocks. There is a new mock going to be released tomorrow, and it's going to be on the practice platform. It's a mock for pre-December 23, and it's been written with recent exams in mind. And basically, you are going to be using it as a learning exercise. It is not indicative. I know everybody's going to ask this question. Is this going to be what's going to come up in my exam? Please do not see it as that, because it won't be what's coming up in your exam. You all get different exams, remember. There's different variants. And so some of you may get a net present value calculation, some may get a WACC calculation, some may get working capital. It's not going to be what's coming up in your exam. It's just an indicative of what could be coming up in your exam. All right. It's really important to do this. You need to practice on the platform you take the exam on. You need to practice that game plan. You need to practice your time management. And above all, you need to practice your nerves. So do it in a dark room, shut away. Make sure you are doing it to time. Make sure that nobody interrupts you. And therefore, you're in that really focused exam environment. Give yourself the 3 hours of clear time. It's not timed, obviously, on the platform, so you can go over time, but try and not, because otherwise you're not putting yourself in the real environment. It's therefore 12 to 14% more likely that you will pass if you do a mock. Now, everybody doesn't understand this about this mock, but what you do is you do it on the platform, you end the exam, and then you go back in under the Mark tab, and the exam will be there. You click on the exam, and the automatic marks will be done. So for section A and section B, so you'll be auto marked. And then you can go through those with the sample answers, understanding where you've done right and where you've gone wrong. And then section C, you have to mark yourself. And the answers are within that mark tab. And you'll see them as PDFs in there. And there is a clear marking scheme for you, allocating all the marks to all the individual areas. Don't forget to give yourself some own figure rule marks if you've got a number wrong at the beginning. And that's how you do it. So please don't ask me that in the Q&A. I've explained that how you mark your mock. Okay, so now we come on to most asked questions. So these are from previous webinars, so I want to go through them again. So most asked questions. Number one, when discounting, I prefer to use Excel functionality. Absolutely, because it's quicker, definitely. However, this also gives a slightly different answer to that used in the tables. Will I be penalised? In section C, no. You will not be penalised because you are using the functionality of the spreadsheet. It's much quicker than going to the tables. But in section A and B MCQs, it's best to use the tables. You don't have an Excel to be able to calculate those discounts anyway, unless you go all the way to section C and do it. So you're using the tables and the answers will be based on the tables. So use them for section A and B. When you have a discussion question within a spreadsheet format, how is it best to do this question? Yeah, I was surprised myself that they ask you to comment in the spreadsheet, because obviously the spreadsheet's difficult to write in. But what you must do, if you have, say, 3 lines, 3 sentences to write, you must put a different sentence on each line. Please don't write it all within the one cell, because it then just starts going all the way across the sheet, and it's very hard for the marker to mark that. So look at this, split your answer almost like half a sentence on one line, half a sentence on the other line, put a full stop at the end of it, and then go to your next point, half a sentence and then half a sentence. The most you would put is 1 full sentence on each cell line. Section C, if you do not get the answer right but show all your workings and have it mostly or partly correct, do you still get marks? Yes, I explained that in the video. Your first mistake gets marked wrong, and then you get the own figure rules following through from then on. It's classic in the net present value calculations, and it's classic in the WACC calculations. If you get one part of your WACC calculation wrong, it gets followed through all the way to the end. But you must label things clearly and show your workings. Do not put the figure in from your calculator without showing any workings. Otherwise, it'll just be marked wrong. Is there any penalty for typo errors or spelling mistakes? No. No typo errors or spelling mistakes. Obviously, for numbers, there will be, but not for writing. So make sure you're coherent in your writing, but obviously spelling mistakes don't matter, or grammar. With so many topics to revise and revision, can you advise on a plan on the best way to spend your time 2 weeks before the exam? Absolutely. What I would do is I would traffic light my topics. I would basically do some MCQs in each of the main syllabus areas to see which of your topics you're not very good at. Obviously the ones that you get wrong. And then the ones that are consistently getting wrong and you don't understand the theory, those are your red topics, and you need to go back and revise and revisit. Your amber topics will be the ones where you might be misreading questions, or you may have just missed a bit of the theory, and so you need to just regain that confidence in that area and go back and understand why you got the question wrong. It may have just been falling for a distractor. The green topics are the ones where you're doing well consistently, and you probably don't need to revisit those. So you would be spending more of the time on those red topics, because I have told you before, I hope, that any topics which you don't like are bound to come up in the exam. So you need to be prepared for them. And if they don't come up, you win. But if they do come up, you also win, because you're going to be able to tackle them. So don't avoid any topics. So my answer to that one is traffic light them and focus on your red topics. What's the best way to learn formulas? Well, the best way to learn formulas is to rewrite them out. Write them out in a big formula sheet. So obviously there's ones which you're given in the exam which you don't need to. The ones which you aren't given in the exam, you need to write them on a big formula sheet, stick it on your wall, or sticky notes, or whatever works for you, or flashcards. But really understanding the formulas will come from seeing them every day. There's also two sets of formulas which are similar but not the same. The ones which you use for calculating the cost of equity, cost of debt, cost of preference shares, get reversed when you're trying to calculate the asset value in business valuations. So you should learn those side by side, because you can use the dividend valuation formula to calculate the cost of equity, but you can also use it to calculate the cost of the share price, or the value of the share price. So understanding how they work against each other will make you really understand those formulas and learn them properly. So put them side by side so you don't get confused. In computing WACC for a question, do I have to write the formulas for WACC? Hopefully, again, that video made it very clear you do not have to write out the formulas. Labeling is more important. So if you're doing the dividend valuation model, for example, make sure you label what your dividend now is. Make sure you label what your growth rate is. And then use those figures in the cell to calculate the final cost of equity. So therefore, if you've got a growth rate right and you've got the dividend wrong, you will get the mark for the growth rate. And then you'll get the final mark for the own figure rule. So it's really important to label the numbers that you're putting into formulas, and then use the cell referencing, or write them in the formula cell so that we can follow it through. Do not write out the formula. It's a waste of time. How do you overcome the feeling of failure? Now, this is really important because we've all failed in our time. And so I think my top answer for this is you need to have a mindset. And it's called ACCA mindfulness. It's hard to pick yourself up, but you need to focus on three things: intention, attention, and attitude. So the intention is you want to get qualified, and that is your motivation. It's your end game. So focus on that. Focus on, I want to get through this. The attention is what you are doing to get there. It's plan your study time. So if you're in this situation now, you're worried about 2 weeks to go for the exam, make sure you plan your study time so you've got some focus. Traffic light your topics and really focus on those areas which you're finding difficult. Making sure that you're planning in rest as well, obviously, and work, but overcoming the failure is the focus, by focusing on the attention. And then the final thing is having that attitude. You must have a positive mindset. You only need 50%, and not of the hard marks. 50% is the easy marks. So don't focus on those hard marks. Go in and go, I am going to be positive. I am going to get those easy marks. Jo has told me I don't need these hard marks. I'm going to flag them away. I'm going to ignore them and focus all my attention on getting those easy marks. And you will get over that 50%. So feeling of failure is hard, but have some ACCA mindfulness, intention, attention, and attitude. Positivity, that's what we need. I can see I'm over time on this, coming on to the Q&A now.
Georgia, that was brilliant, and such a great way to sort of end that segment, because we've actually had a student mention in the chat. So this is John, who mentioned, Jo, I feel really nervous, as if I haven't studied and practiced enough, and can you please advise? So I almost feel like what you've just said there about intention, attitude, attention, that sort of applies there as well. I know nerves are normal, Jo, you probably felt nervous when you were doing these exams. I know I certainly did.
Oh my
So
goodness. The nerves are so hard. Yeah.
they
Yeah.
are. But the other thing to remember is that nerves are good. It's all about perspective as well, right? Having a little bit of nerves can be good because it helps you, perform to your potential. Obviously, you don't want the nerves to be so debilitating that you can't answer any of the questions. But Jo has given some really good advice, here. So hopefully, John, that makes you feel a little bit more better about how you can manage that. And I know some of the colleagues on this call also giving you a little bit of support there. You're never going to feel ready for an exam, says Beth, and everyone feels that way, says Charan as well. So do bear in mind you're all in the same boat, okay? And nerves are absolutely normal. It's just having that shift in perspective. So Jo, I'm going to dip into the Q&A inbox, and I can see we've got quite a few questions coming in. I'm going to kick off with one from Yuvraj Wasim. He's basically saying, hey Jo, I'm facing a lot of difficulty with the theory of FM, and I can't find myself writing effectively. So please guide here. So any words of wisdom here, Jo, for Yuvraj?
Yeah. I think I'd answer that one in that it depends what type of learner you are, you know? So if you're an active learner, then you need to start saying things to yourself. You need to start looking, maybe using flashcards and sort of thinking, right, what is CAPM? And start, reading, writing out what it is first of all, and then start learning it by saying it to yourself, you know, or acting it to yourself. And then it will go in that way because then it resonates with what you're doing, or you're actively walking around, you're talking to yourself, and it will end up going in. you can't you can't do this without actually obviously writing out what it is. And it kind of is a rote learning thing, but you do need to just get yourself actively learning it. If you're a visual learner, then I would do mind maps. So you stick CAPM in the middle, and then you talk about all the things that relate to CAPM around in bubbles on the outside. And you stick it on your wall, and you'll look at it every day, and eventually you'll remember that mind map when you go into the exam, and you can apply it. So active obviously was readings, not productive, but writing out and doing questions as well. And if you're verbal, it's more like speaking the process. So I do think that it depends what sort of learner you are. I am a visual learner, so I would do the mind maps for me, definitely. But also I'm an active person, and so I do like to do practicing questions. And it is important that getting that theory to relate to the question asked, not the question you want to be asked. So go through the practice exam kit and look at the theory questions, and maybe group them into sections like I did with my slide, and said, about the different aspects of a risk adjusted discount rate. When do we use it? How do we calculate it? And why do we use it? They're all questions that could be asked about that theory. So slot keywords next to each of your questions that answers it in that context. Right? In that context, not in the context that you've learned from the back of the book. Okay. Hopefully that answers the question.
No, I think that really does, and actually reminded me of something that I would do when I was a student. So my then boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, I would often just talk to him about stuff that I was learning, almost as like a test to myself. So just saying things out loud, like you suggested, Jo, if you're visual, obviously do the mind maps, but saying it out loud helps you to just retain things as well. So maybe you could talk to your friend about an FM theory that you've learned, just to see if you can remember it, because that might be a way to think about it as well. So great tip there. Now, sticking with this theme of theory, we've got Rasa asking, what is the rough split between theory and calculations that will be tested in the exam? So do we have an answer for that, Jo?
Oh, it's absolutely 50-50. You cannot rely on passing the exam just being able to do calculations. So, obviously there may be more of a, in some exams it may be 55, 45, and either way, but you've got to be prepared that it's 50-50, definitely.
Brilliant. And then we've got one here, sort of moving away from the theory. It's a student called Durga asking, are we allowed to take scientific and regular calculators to the centre-based exams?
I'm pretty certain you are. I mean, if you're not, obviously take the scientific one in. So I would take 2 and then see what they say, because I actually don't know the answer to that. I'm pretty certain that previous students have taken in 2 exams, 2 calculators. But if you're not, they'll
Yeah,
just take one off you.
yeah.
So I would just
And
take the
also,
scientific one in.
yeah, I agree. And I think also don't forget that on the exam interface itself, you get given there's a calculator that you can use. Appreciate not all students will want to use the on-screen calculator, but the on-screen calculator does offer the basic functionality, but there's a scientific one as well that you can use. And as long as your scientific calculator, I think, doesn't hold or store formulas in it, it should be fine. But the invigilators tend to do a bit of a check anyway. So yeah,
Yeah.
as Jo suggested, maybe take them both and see what they permit.
Yeah. I know with the
Okay.
remote exams, you can only have one calculator. Definitely with the remote exams.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've got here Theodora asking, will the formulas be given in the exams, or do I need to cram them? I know, Jo, you've already answered, in terms of the FAQs, a little bit about how students can remember formulas. But just here, are there any formulas that are given to students in the exams?
Yes, there's many formulas and it's on the exam formula sheet, and you'll find that in the practice platform when you go in. But it should be any of your learning materials, that if you've got an exam kit, or you've got to go on the study hub, there will be the formula sheet that's given to you in the exam. It's got quite a few formulas on for the FM exam. There's quite a few there. So you don't need to learn those formulas, but you obviously need to understand them. Okay. And there's lots of formulas that aren't given in the exam that you do need to cram, which is definite. So you must make sure you learn those ones. And you must go through the syllabus. And it's very clear in the syllabus which ones are on your exam formula sheet and which ones aren't, because in a textbook, you're told it.
Okay, now, Jo, I know you mentioned, about the syllabus, and really students can't selectively revise in these exams. They've really got to cover all the syllabus learning outcomes. But we have a student here, Capello, who's asking, can you advise on tricky topics? So in your opinion, Jo, are there specific trickier topics or challenging topics that students might want to ensure they do get covered, make sure they have a good understanding of before the exam?
Yeah. Well, as I said in the beginning, section B, you will definitely get business valuations, asset valuations question, and you'll definitely get a risk management question. So there's 2 definite questions coming up in your exam, and they are tricky topics. You cannot avoid them. They're coming up. So I would recommend that most students focus on those 2, because they know they're coming up and they're tricky. Now, I'm not going to say you then ignore the rest of the syllabus, because of course in section C, you're going to get 2 questions from the other 3 areas, main areas: working capital, investment appraisal, and business finance. So again, they're all tricky topics in their own rights. But I can't just say revise those, but I'm just pointing out that they will definitely be in your exam, those 2, and they are tricky areas.
Thank you for that, Jo. I'm just dipping into the inbox and I'm seeing a question come through about, whether it's okay for students to start with section C questions first during the exam. So is it okay for a student to start with section C and then maybe do B and A, would you say?
Absolutely. It's your exam. If you practice doing it that way and you're successful, often people go CAB, you know. I like to go A first, because it's quite nice to feel that you've got some of the MCQs out the way, and you may, as I say, you may save time because you find some of them easier than not. Please don't go over time. But I always do recommend getting section C done before the end of the exam, because often section C is where you pass or fail the paper. Because what really happens if you run out of time on section A and B, and that means you're reduced your time on section C, there is often a part of the question that you don't get to, and then you realize that was so easy. I could have easily gained all those marks on that. And you could have done that. You've lost all those marks at the detriment of doing the harder stuff in section A and B. So I do recommend getting section C done either at the beginning or in the middle.
Brilliant, love that. It's all about prioritizing as well, isn't it? Just making sure that you get the breadth of coverage across the syllabus, making sure you answer each question to maximize your chances of passing. Now, just to address a couple of questions that are coming through about the formula sheet. So I have just shared in the chat in response to a student query about where can I locate the formula sheet. Jo mentioned it's available on the practice platform. There's a formula sheet, but there's also a link to our ACCA Global webpage, which, you know what, seeing as we're getting a couple of questions on this, I'm just going to paste it on the attendee chat. So this is a web page on ACCA Global. You'll see on the left-hand side, there is an option to download the formula sheet. So, you know, you can print this out if you want as well, just so you have it there as a physical copy. So that's the formula sheet there. Okay, Jo, I wonder if you want to dip into the Q&A inbox. I know we're pretty short for time now.
Looking for some.
If there's any specific ones that you feel you could add value to in the last couple of minutes that we have here before we wrap up.
Well, the main thing that people are sort of saying, what should we do in the last couple of days and stuff? Well, make sure you do a mock exam, because, you know, and at the time that you're going to be doing your exam, so you understand that that's safe. If you're doing your exam in the afternoon, then do a mock exam in the afternoon on the weekend, for instance. And also in a similar environment. So I know if you're doing it in an exam centre, you'll have people sitting around you. So maybe do it in the office at work if you can, with people sitting around you, but just say I'm here for 3 hours and put some headphones on or something. It's really important to get that practice in so that you feel those nerves, you feel what it's like to do a 3-hour exam under time conditions. The other thing that you do need to do, it's now, you know, it's a few weeks to go for the exam, is to make sure you've looked at the examining team's articles, you know, the examining team's examiner's reports. They are indicative of what the type of question you're going to be getting in your exam, the more recent ones especially, and therefore they give you tips and tricks on how to answer those questions effectively. Always look at those. That's so important. Why not take advice from the team that actually are setting your exam? And questions are being repeated, we're seeing with FM. So they've asked the question about pros and cons of IRR in the context of net present value a few times. You know, they do get repeated. They've asked about replacement cycles a few times. You will see that in the examiner's report. They'll say this question was similar to one we set 3 years ago or 2 years ago. And so it's really important to do these past questions. And I would focus on the ones from 2000 onwards, which are on the practice platform.
Thank you so much there, Jo. Yeah, if there's anything else that you want to deal with in the last couple of minutes, and then we'll sort of close. I think we'll have time for just one more.
I know, it's quite hard to see. Oh, can we use the function for the IRR instead of the trial and error method? Absolutely. In section C, use the IRR function. It's quicker. And so if you practice using it for instance, for the cost of debt, you have to lay out the cash flows in a slightly different way, but practice doing that. It's really important because it's much, much quicker. And of course, if you ask for the IRR and the net present value format, then again, it's very easy to use the net present value cash flows to calculate the IRR rather than using the interpolation method. But unfortunately, if you get it in section A and B, you have to use the interpolation method. So you need to be able to do both.
Brilliant. Okay, now, as much as I hate to break things up, I know we're really running out of time, so I do need to bring things to a close. Now, hopefully the questions that Jo has dealt with through this segment and the frequently asked questions that she touched on earlier have been useful to all of you listening today. I can see from some of the comments coming through that, and the emojis coming through as well, that this has been of good use and of benefit. Now, don't forget that as well as the resources that Jo has outlined through the webinar, including the study hub, she also referred to the examiner's reports and the examiner articles. ACCA have made available a brand new mock, a pre-December 2023 mock exam, which Jo also touched on earlier in her slides. So if you haven't completed that already, it's definitely worth attempting that pre-December mock, okay? It will only be available for a short period in the run up to the December exam, and it will then be removed. So please make sure you attempt it before then. Now, detailed marking guides are available. Jo also referenced how you can access them, and I had shared in the chat message a detailed step-by-step video that shows you how you can access those marking guides as well. So do make sure you're self-marking and debriefing, because that's equally as important as doing the exam. Now, debrief videos for these mocks will also be made available towards the end of this week, so look out for that. That's on our ACCA Student Study Resources YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed already, do subscribe to our YouTube channel. All our debrief videos will be added there, okay? Now, some of you are asking if you'll get a recorded version of this webinar. You absolutely will. So look out for an email in your inbox giving you access to the recorded version, but very shortly we'll also be uploading an MP4 of this onto our YouTube channel as well, where we do host an archive of webinars, so you can refer to it then. Now, massive thank you to Jo. She's provided some great insights into FM, the team behind the scenes dealing with your questions, and obviously to you guys for your participation. Wishing you the very best of luck for your forthcoming exam, and that's a good luck and a goodbye from us.
Good luck.